Was this not their campaign promise? What informed the promise? Didn't they do the numbers first? In the case of the Free Senior High School, is the minister designate saying that only schools writing WASI are required for the Free Senior High School program? With respect to tertiary students, the number of students in our tertiary schools is a public record, and an estimate ought to have been known with the promise. On behalf of our sons, daughters, nephews, and nieces, we wish to remind the government that these students will be entering tertiary institutions any moment from now. Particularly for KNUST, the deadline for payment of fees for freshers was just yesterday. The students are waiting. We acknowledge the minister designates definitive commitment to scrap the betting tax, e-levy, COVID levy, and emission tax. While this act is commendable, it raises concerns that the minister failed to address. First, we would like to know how the minister designate plans to make up for the revenue shortfalls that will arise as a result of the tax cuts. The minister's quick response was cuts in expenditure. While we believe expenditure cuts could be a possible way to match revenue with expenses in order not to run into fiscal deficits, it is not in itself the ultimate solution to address revenue shortfalls. On the matter of expenditure cuts, the minister designate fell short in providing clarity on which aspects of government expenditure he intends to cut. Is it salaries, interest payments, or capital expenditure? Would the minister designate expenditure cuts affect teacher trainee allowances, nursing trainee allowances, free senior high school, the livelihood empowerment against poverty, subsidy on fertilizer for farmers? Will they affect the school feeding program? Will they affect salaries of government workers? Is it going to affect improvement in conditions of service for teachers, health professionals, security officers, and all essential service providers? Is it going to affect infrastructure in the road sector, education sector, health sector, and agriculture sector? Is it going to affect ongoing road projects? Is it going to affect youth employment? Is it going to affect social safety nets for the Ghanaian people? Ghanaians need to know. The minister designates unconvincing responses regarding how he intends to make up for the revenue shortfalls, leave us with no choice but to think that he will scrap these taxes but introduce new ones, perhaps more draconian than those he would scrap. We shall now examine the specific issues with the respective nominees when they appeared before the Appointments Committee. And I shall start with the Finance Minister designate. The Honorable Dr. Kesiel Atuba Forson, who appeared as the Finance Minister designate, was evasive, inconsistent, and lacked clarity of thought. Having served as a Deputy Minister of Finance and a ranking member of the Finance Committee, one would have expected his answers to be forthright and to exude concrete solutions. For instance, on the specific matter of whether the government would cater for the first-year tuition fees or academic facility user fees of tertiary students as promised, we found the minister designate's response highly disappointing. How can a finance minister designate look into the faces of parents and young Ghanaian students and say that because he's not yet the minister, he cannot answer whether the pledge by President Mahama to pay for their fees will be honored. This is a clear way of telling our tertiary students that the NDC party just deceived them for their votes. When asked about the free senior high school program and whether it will be extended to private schools as indicated in the NDC manifesto, the minister-designate, in a very dismissive manner, asked whether those private schools' right was C. That is the West Africa Senior Secondary School Certificate Examination. First, it was shocking to observe the minister-designate feign ignorance of the fact that there are many private senior high schools that right was C. We can all recall that during the election campaign, President Mahama met the leadership of the private senior high schools and promised to include private schools in the free senior high school program. If President Mahama and the NDC knew that no private senior high school right was C, why did they promise to include them in the free senior high school program? For the information of the minister and President Mahama, there are private schools in Ghana that right was C, and they are anxiously waiting to be included in the free senior high school program. To provide the CVs of the nominees to committee members in advance, and the refusal to invite questions on the CVs were all calculated attempts to obstruct constructive and effective scrutiny of the nominees. Ladies and gentlemen, the chairman of the Appointments Committee was the first real obstacle to a diligent vetting of the ministerial nominees. He denied the Ghanaian people and the minority members of the committee the opportunity to conduct a thorough vetting of the nominees. He was protective of the nominees and extremely partisan. Members of the committee were shouted at by the chairman. You all witnessed how the member for Etiwa East, the Honorable Abuna Osei Asari, was shouted at in an attempt to protect the nominees. The chairman denied legitimate members of the committee the opportunity to ask relevant questions and railroaded the nominees through the process. It must be noted that the altercation between our side of the committee and the chairman was a direct protest against his conduct. Under the facade of a lack of capacity, he disregarded the fact that those he bullied were members of parliament, and that the committee is a subbody of the House. It cannot be right that members who are taxed by the Ghanaian people with oversight are denied the opportunity to scrutinize the nominees. The chairman and the majority members of the Appointments Committee owe it to Ghana to assist us in fulfilling the work entrusted to us by the Constitution. If this is not changed moving forward, we fear that an irreparable harm will be done to our democracy, with round pegs occupying square holes. Came from Martin, and he asks about the fact that I am quoted to have said that scrapping the e-levy and the betting tax would be in violation to the IMF program. And today, a minority is saying it's a commendable act to scrap these taxes. How do I reconcile these statements? First and foremost, I have never said anywhere that scrapping betting tax and e-levy will be in violation of the IMF program. If you all recall, the issue about e-levy and betting tax is something that the new Patriotic Party, led by our flag bearer, Dr. Mahamudu Bawumia, pledged in our manifesto that we were going to scrap. In fact, in 2020, Dr. Mahamudu Bawumia is noted to have granted interview on Peace FM, stating his position on a task in the nature of e-levy, where Dr. Bawumia made it categorically clear that it is not a prudent thing to do to tax Momo. This was way before e-levy was introduced. But the government is an entire body. Majority decision is what pertains. The government took a decision, brought e-levy and betting tax. But the vice president still made his case clear. In the run-up to the 2024 election, both leading candidates, Dr. Bawumia and Mr. John Dramani Mahama, made commitments to scrap the e-levy. And so it is our position as members of the minority that betting tax and e-levy should be scrapped. But when the minister appeared before the committee, we asked him, are you going to scrap these taxes? He said yes. Then we asked the follow-up question. If we scrap these levies, the vacuum in the revenue basket that will be created, how are you going to make up for that revenue shortfall? The minister's response is what we find unsatisfactory, because he said what they are going to do in place of the revenue shortfall is to cut expenditure. But we state that that in itself will not address the problem. If you are cutting expenditure, who is going to be affected in the expenditure cuts? So that is not the solution. The solution is what the flag bearer of the NPP, Dr. Mahamudu Bawumia, professed before the elections. Dr. Bawumia gave two reasons that if he cut e-levy or scrap the taxes, this is what he's going to do. One was to make sure that the revenue that will come from betting tax and e-levy, which could be used to build schools and build roads and buy buses for schools, that government will not have. He will invite the private sector to come into the fray, such that the private sector will provide this infrastructure on lease and government will pay over time. And that in itself was going to free government about 3% of the GDP. Secondly, Dr. Bawumia said that if you scrap these taxes and you lose revenue, the other way to make up for the revenue shortfall without necessarily introducing new taxes is to ensure enhanced tax compliance. How do you ensure the tax compliance? Vice President Bawumia said that he was going to introduce the flat rate tax to make it easy for the computation of tax and for compliance, and also bring the tax amnesty and the tax policy. This in itself was also going to give about 2% of GDP. So in totality, these two proposals were going to offer government about 5% of GDP. Meanwhile, if you put these taxes we want to scrap, or we talked about to scrap together, they are not even up to 1% of GDP. So the NPP, led by Dr. Bawumia, had clear-cut policy alternatives to make up for the revenue shortfall that will occur as a result of the tax cut without necessarily introducing new tax. So we had expenditure realignment. If we say you're going to cut expenditure, it means you are going to deprive the Ghanaian people the opportunities that they should benefit from. You're going to deprive free senior high school. You're going to deprive people access to jobs. That is not what we want. So we have not said that this will affect anything. What I drew the minority's attention to, and I want to say this and end, is the fact that we have in our debt restructuring program a commitment to stay at a certain debt sustainability level target. And that target matches our revenue with our debt service burden. So at any point in time that you have debt to service, you should have commensurate revenue to match it.
When approved, he is going to be the chief enforcer of our laws. When he appeared before the committee and was asked about the legality of this oral, he justified it. He justified the unconstitutional establishment and putting together of people who go about harassing former government officials. We believe that the establishment of that oral committee violates and flies in the face of our Constitution. And so one would have expected that a law professor in the person of Dr. Ayeni would have condemned it. But rather, he justified it. Now his justification is now putting the work of the police CID, IOCO, and special prosecutor, and constitutionally established bodies out of business. It is concerning, and we want the people of Ghana to know that no serious country will entertain anything such as this. And so if you are a former government official and you're invited by this so-called ORA, our advice to you from the minority is to boycott any invitation from the ORA team. We are not going to be part of it because we believe that there are constitutionally established bodies that can investigate any so-called misdeeds of the government. What are they doing? What they are doing is to go about disturbing people, entering homes, taking vehicles, seizing vehicles, and more or less taking over lands from people who have genuinely purchased lands. What the former government officials have done is to acquire properties that legally they could acquire. No illegality has taken place. In any case, the NBC, their members have also acquired lands in this country. The executives, Okujeto, Ablakwa, and Co., they live in the cantonments. They live in the airports. They live in the childhoods. Lands which were government lands, which they bought many years ago. The people of Ghana should not tolerate this aura, which is out there to only persecute the former government officials.